Lily Harper had never intended to be part of any neighborhood drama when she bought the old Victorian house on the corner of Ashford Lane, tucked away behind towering oak trees and hedgerows that hadn't been trimmed properly in years. The house, with its peeling white paint and sagging porch, had stood vacant for nearly half a decade before she found it listed through a private seller, and despite its dilapidated appearance, Lily saw it for what it could be: a sanctuary, a restoration project, and, most importantly, a fresh start after the disintegration of her previous life. She had poured every ounce of her limited savings into acquiring the property, spending months navigating tedious paperwork, home inspections, and city permits, and when the keys were finally in her hand, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She imagined herself turning the ruins into a vibrant, warm home, with flourishing gardens, tall fences for privacy, and plenty of open space to work on her art projects without the prying eyes of curious passers-by. The first few weeks were hard but gratifying. Lily spent her days hauling debris out of the backyard, hiring local contractors to stabilize the foundations, and handpicking materials that honored the house's historic character while still reinforcing its aging structure. She would fall into bed each night exhausted but satisfied, the scent of fresh lumber and wet soil clinging to her skin. Her interactions with the neighbors were minimal, mostly limited to polite nods and occasional waves as she carried groceries from her car or wrestled paint cans up the front steps. Most of them seemed friendly enough, or at least indifferent, which suited Lily perfectly. She didn't move to the outskirts of Savannah to make friends. She wanted quiet, stability, and space to breathe. Everything seemed to be falling into place until the first encounter with Karen Miller. Lily first noticed her one Sunday afternoon while installing a lattice along the side fence, a precaution against wandering wildlife and stray dogs. Karen, a heavy-set woman in her mid-50s with aggressively styled blonde hair and a perpetual expression of disapproval carved into her face, stood at the property line with arms crossed, watching Lily work. She didn't introduce herself or even smile. She simply stared, her eyes narrowed as if Lily's mere existence offended her. When their gazes finally met, Karen shook her head slowly, turned, and disappeared into her house without a word. Lily shrugged it off at first, assuming she had just encountered one of those neighbors, territorial, old-fashioned, and likely bitter about the new blood moving into their precious, historic district. Over the next few days, Karen's silent judgment became an unwelcome fixture. Whether Lily was watering plants, meeting with contractors, or simply unloading supplies, she could feel Karen's gaze boring into her from behind her immaculately trimmed hedge. It was as if Karen had appointed herself the unofficial warden of Ashford Lane, determined to monitor every nail, every brushstroke, every brick Lily touched. Still, Lily kept her head down and carried on. After all, she hadn't done anything wrong. Her renovation permits were in perfect order, her contractors licensed and vetted, her improvements entirely within the neighborhood's regulations. If Karen had a problem with her, it was her own to stew over. Things came to a head when Lily decided to install a tall wooden privacy fence along the back and sides of her yard. Given the history of the property, she wanted to maintain its open front view facing the street, but the side and rear perimeters she intended to shield from view, partially for security, partially to claim some much-needed solitude. She spent days selecting the right materials: durable cedar planks, a warm stain that blended with the natural surroundings, classic wrought iron accents at the corners. The fence wasn't an afterthought. It was a statement of reclaiming her personal space. She hired a reputable local team to install it professionally, ensuring every measure adhered to code. Lily had even gone the extra mile, submitting her plans for review by the Historic Society liaison, receiving written approval weeks before construction began. The morning the work crews arrived, the tranquility of Ashford Lane shattered. Karen stormed out of her house, robe flapping around her wide frame, waving her arms in theatrical outrage. She accused Lily of destroying the neighborhood's character, of cutting herself off from the community, and even of building a fortress like she had something to hide. Neighbors peered out of windows and cracked front doors, some shaking their heads in embarrassment at Karen's outburst, others simply enjoying the unexpected entertainment. Lily remained calm, stepping aside to let the workers continue without interruption, refusing to give Karen the reaction she so clearly craved. Karen's complaints didn't stop at verbal assaults. She attempted to interfere with the workers, planting herself near the property line and yelling criticisms about measurements, post depth, and staining techniques. When they ignored her, she resorted to more passive-aggressive tactics, blasting loud, patriotic music from a battered radio facing Lily's backyard, leaving bags of lawn clippings dumped at the edge of the property, even dragging a rotting old picnic table to her side of the line, creating an eyesore clearly intended to spoil Lily's view. But none of it deterred Lily. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. She paid her invoices, tipped the workers generously for their patience, and stood admiring her new fence the evening it was completed, feeling a rare, powerful sense of victory. The fence stood 8 feet tall, solid and beautiful, enclosing Lily's private garden and side yard like a warm, protective arm. The rich, dark stain caught the sunset and seemed to glow at dusk. For the first time since moving in, Lily felt truly at home. She imagined hosting quiet evenings under the stars, working on her sculptures in the backyard without fear of intrusive eyes, living life on her terms. She didn't know then that for Karen Miller the fence was not simply a barrier of wood and nails. It was a declaration of war. The tension simmered over the next few days. Karen would stomp up and down her driveway, muttering loudly about selfish newcomers and disrespect for traditions. She made a point of glaring at Lily any time they crossed paths, sometimes loudly commenting to passing neighbors about how certain people didn't understand the spirit of Ashford Lane. Lily remained aloof, refusing to be dragged into petty squabbles. She documented Karen's harassment carefully, noting dates, times, and details in a small leather notebook she kept tucked inside her kitchen drawer, a habit born not from paranoia, but from experience. She had learned the hard way in life that it was always better to have receipts if the situation ever escalated. And escalate it did. Late one evening, long after sunset had painted the sky in deep indigo, Lily noticed strange movements near the back fence. The security lights she had installed flickered on, catching a glimpse of a bulky figure crouching near the wooden panels. Lily's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she peered through the side window, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding just beyond her garden. Whoever it was, though Lily had little doubt, it wasn't a simple passerby. The figure moved deliberately, dragging something along the base of the fence, pausing, adjusting, continuing. Lily didn't waste time. She didn't confront, she didn't shout, she didn't even step outside. Instead, she picked up her phone with trembling fingers and quietly dialed the non-emergency police line, reporting suspicious activity on her property. She spoke calmly, giving her address, describing the figure as best she could, insisting she didn't feel safe checking it herself. Then she sat by the window, phone still in hand, breathing shallowly, waiting. It wasn't fear that gripped her. It was cold, sharp calculation. She understood that confronting someone like Karen alone at night could only end badly. For her, she needed witnesses, official reports, indisputable documentation. If Karen wanted to turn this into a campaign of intimidation, Lily would answer it with patience and strategy. She wouldn't be dragged into a shouting match on a dark street corner. She would win this the right way. When the police cruiser rolled quietly up to her house 15 minutes later, its headlights off, Lily waved them toward the side gate, whispering explanations through the crack in her front door. The two officers, one young and alert, the other older and carrying the weary posture of a man who had seen too many midnight calls, moved with silent efficiency, slipping around the perimeter of the yard, flashlights cutting across the hedges and fence line. Lily stayed inside, her heart hammering against her ribs, straining to hear what was happening outside. Moments later, she caught the faint flicker of blue and red lights as the officers returned. this time leading a disheveled and sputtering Karen by the elbow, her hand stained dark with what looked suspiciously like gasoline. They found a broken plastic jug, its pungent smell unmistakable even from the porch, along with a series of rags stuffed against the fence's base. The officers separated Karen from the evidence, questioning her in low, firm voices. Karen, for her part, protested loudly, claiming she was simply cleaning up old debris along the property line, that she accidentally spilled something, that Lily's new barricade was a hazard to the community. Her words tumbled over each other, incoherent and frantic. Lily said little. She provided the officers with her renovation permits, the footage from her security cameras, her meticulously kept incident log. She answered questions clearly, respectfully, and let the mountain of evidence speak for itself. The officers took notes. They took pictures. They issued warnings. They promised follow-ups. And Karen, glaring at Lily with a venomous intensity that would have terrified a weaker person, was finally sent home under threat of arrest if she trespassed again. Lily closed the door behind them, locking it carefully. She leaned against the heavy wood, feeling the slow, bittersweet wave of adrenaline ebb from her body. She wasn't foolish enough to believe this was over. Karen had declared war, and she wouldn't go down quietly. But Lily wasn't the same person who had fled bad relationships and stifling cities looking for peace. She was someone else now, someone ready for a fight, someone ready to win. The incident with Karen being caught red-handed near the fence should have been enough to cool things down, or at least force her to retreat into whatever lair of bitterness she called home. For a brief moment, Lily allowed herself to believe it had. The days following that night passed in a strange kind of uneasy silence, heavy with the absence of Karen's blustering presence. No more shouting matches across the property line. No more passive-aggressive lawn ornaments appearing mysteriously overnight. Lily worked on restoring her backyard, repairing the slight scorch marks near the fence's base where Karen's gasoline-soaked rags had left ugly black stains on the wood. She ordered a fresh batch of cedar planks, spending a long Saturday sanding and staining them herself, letting the repetitive, methodical work bleed the tension from her body. It almost felt normal again. Almost. But hatred, once unleashed, rarely dies quietly. It festers and mutates, finding new, uglier ways to surface, and Karen Miller was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. If anything, her failure to destroy Lily's fence seemed to ignite something far worse inside her, a need not just to retaliate, but to escalate. It began with small, almost imperceptible changes. Trash that wasn't Lily's began to appear near her curb. Broken bottles, used fast food bags, crumpled beer cans. She woke one morning to find the hinges of her side gate oiled to the point of dripping, the subtle sabotage making it swing wildly in the breeze with an irritating screech. Packages delivered to her porch started arriving battered, as if someone had kicked them along the sidewalk before tossing them carelessly at her door. Lily documented everything, of course. She took photographs, recorded dates and times, filed quiet complaints through the proper channels. She refused to react publicly, to give Karen the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. Still, it wore on her, the relentless pettiness, the sense of being watched, the feeling that even in her own home she could never fully let her guard down. It gnawed at her peace of mind like termites under fresh wood. Then came the first real escalation. It was nearly midnight when Lily, curled on her couch with a worn novel and a half-drunk cup of chamomile tea, heard the sharp crack of something hitting the side of her house. She froze, heart hammering, and waited. Another crack, louder this time, followed by a dull metallic clatter. Moving cautiously, she peered through the front window and caught a glimpse of shadows fleeing down the sidewalk, too distant to identify but unmistakably human. The next morning, she found the source, a scattering of heavy stones, most no larger than a baseball, hurled at the side of her house hard enough to dent the aluminum guttering and crack two small garden lights. One rock had embedded itself halfway into the soft earth of her flower bed, crushing a cluster of newly planted lilies. She called the non-emergency police line again, filed another report, added more footage from her security cameras, this time catching the blurry figures in motion, though not clearly enough to make out faces. The officer who took her statement was sympathetic but realistic. Without clear identification, there wasn't much they could do beyond patrolling the neighborhood more frequently. Lily didn't argue. She understood the limits of the system. Instead, she adjusted her strategy. She installed stronger floodlights along the sides of her property, motion-activated and blindingly bright, illuminating every inch of her yard at the slightest hint of movement. She reinforced her gate with heavier latches and a padlock. She placed additional cameras at higher angles, ensuring no blind spots. She even reached out to a local security company and arranged for a consultation about installing a monitored alarm system. Every action was deliberate, calm, and utterly without drama. She refused to be bullied out of her home, but she wasn't foolish enough to think brute stubbornness alone would protect her. Still, she couldn't deny that the tension was tightening like a vice around her daily life. She found herself flinching at sudden noises, double-checking locks, sleeping with her phone charged and within reach. She developed the habit of taking a slow drive around the block before pulling into her driveway at night, scanning for anything unusual. An unfamiliar car parked too close, a figure loitering near the hedge. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. The pressure finally came to a head 2 weeks later. It was another humid Georgia evening, the air thick and restless when Lily returned home from a late supply run. As she pulled into her driveway, headlights sweeping across the front of her house, she noticed immediately that something was wrong. The side gate was ajar, swinging lazily in the sticky breeze. That was impossible. She had locked it that morning, checked it twice before leaving. Heart pounding, she killed the engine but left the headlights on, flooding the yard with light. She stayed inside the car for a long moment, scanning the area. Nothing moved. No shadows darted. Still, she knew better than to assume the coast was clear. Slowly, she reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the heavy-duty flashlight she kept there. Then, keeping her phone gripped tightly in her other hand, she stepped out of the car and advanced cautiously toward the side of the house. Her thumb hovered over the emergency call button, ready to summon help at the slightest provocation. When she reached the gate, her stomach turned. The latch hadn't simply been undone, it had been smashed, the metal bent inward as if struck with a hammer or heavy tool. Beyond the gate, the backyard was a mess. Lawn furniture overturned, flower beds trampled, several garden tools scattered haphazardly across the lawn. Most disturbingly, there were faint scorched patches along the ground near the fence, blackened ovals as if someone had attempted to start small fires and failed. Lily backed away immediately, retreating to the safety of her car. She drove 3 blocks away before calling the police, her voice steady but low, describing a possible break-in, attempted arson, and vandalism. She made sure to mention her previous reports, her security footage, her incident logs. This time, the response was faster. Within 10 minutes, 2 squad cars pulled into her driveway, lights flashing but sirens off. Officers fanned out, inspecting the damage, taking statements, reviewing the most recent footage from her cameras. One of the officers, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, paused the footage and pointed at the screen. "There," she said grimly. "That's your neighbor, isn't it?" It wasn't the clearest image, but there was no mistaking the wide figure lumbering across Lily's backyard, clad in an oversized sweatshirt and carrying what looked like a plastic gas can. Karen Miller, caught yet again in the act of sabotaging Lily's property. The officers didn't waste time. They knocked on Karen's door, standing firm as she screamed through the cracked frame that she wasn't answering any questions without her lawyer. Eventually, under the threat of a formal warrant, Karen agreed to a voluntary search. They found another gas can in her garage, half empty and reeking of accelerant. They also found a stash of old rags, matches, and several pieces of scrap wood that matched the debris found near Lily's fence. Charges were filed that night. trespassing, attempted arson, vandalism, and criminal mischief. Karen, red-faced and shaking with rage, was led to a patrol car, her wrists cuffed behind her back. As she stumbled down the walkway, she fixed Lily with a look so filled with hate that it would have frozen a lesser woman in place. But Lily didn't flinch. She simply stood by her front porch, arms crossed, watching impassively as Karen was driven away into the night. It wasn't over yet. Lily knew that. There would be court dates, insurance claims, endless paperwork. Karen would fight the charges, of course, dragging things out with whatever spiteful, desperate tactics she could muster. But Lily also knew something deeper, something more important. The war Karen had started was already lost. Not because Lily was louder or meaner or better connected, but because Lily had done everything the right way, patient, precise, and relentless. Karen had allowed her hatred to blind her, to drive her into reckless, self-destructive action. And now, whatever twisted sense of superiority she once held over Ashford Lane had gone up in smoke, just like the scorched patches marring the edge of Lily's backyard. The neighborhood would never forget it. Neither would Lily, and the worst part for Karen. Lily hadn't had to lift a finger. Karen had burned herself. If Lily Harper had allowed herself even a moment of complacency after Karen's arrest, she might have been caught off guard by what came next. But Lily had lived enough life to know that people like Karen didn't simply accept consequences and move on. With dignity. They nursed their grievances like open wounds, festering and growing into something even more toxic, and Karen was nothing if not predictable in her venomous pride. The week following her arrest, Ashford Lane hummed with whispers and pointed glances. Neighbors who had previously stayed neutral now found themselves forced to pick sides, though most did so quietly, wary of being drawn into the orbit of either woman. A few sympathetic souls brought Lily casseroles or left encouraging notes tucked into her mailbox, small gestures of solidarity that Lily appreciated more than she let on. But the general atmosphere was one of tension, brittle and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. Karen, naturally, was nowhere to be seen in public during those first few days after her release. Her SUV, or what remained of it, had been towed away, leaving an ugly black scorch mark in her driveway, a visual testament to her failure. Her windows stayed shuttered, her blinds drawn, her porch light dark. But Lily knew better than to assume the quiet meant surrender. People like Karen didn't just lick their wounds in silence. They plotted, they seethed, and when they struck again, they made sure it was even messier than before. The first sign came not through a confrontation, but through paperwork. An official-looking envelope, thick and heavy, delivered by certified mail to Lily's door. Inside was a formal notice of intent to sue. Karen, through a hastily retained lawyer whose reputation for frivolous lawsuits was well known in town, was accusing Lily of emotional distress, intentional infliction of hardship, and property devaluation. The suit claimed that Lily's construction of the fence and her deliberate malicious actions had triggered a sequence of events culminating in the destruction of Karen's vehicle and her arrest, painting Karen not as the aggressor, but as the true victim. Lily read the document twice, her hands trembling not with fear, but with a deep, incredulous anger. It was laughable, absurd, a clumsy attempt at revenge through the court system, but it was also dangerous. Frivolous or not, a lawsuit meant legal fees, court appearances, stress. It was a clear escalation, a move designed not to win in court, but to drain Lily emotionally and financially, to punish her for daring to stand her ground. She didn't panic. Instead, she immediately contacted the attorney she had consulted during the earlier incidents, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rachel Bennett who specialized in property disputes and civil harassment cases. Rachel reviewed the documents with the grim patience of someone well-versed in manufactured legal drama, then laid out their strategy with brutal efficiency. They would countersue for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress, using the mountain of evidence Lily had so carefully gathered, The security footage, the police reports, the vandalism logs, the testimony of responding officers. If Karen wanted a courtroom battle, Lily would give her one, and she would make sure the blows landed where they hurt most. Still, the lawsuit was only the opening salvo. At the same time the legal wrangling began, Karen started a new campaign of social warfare. Rumors began to circulate through the neighborhood, fueled by Karen's few remaining allies, gossipy, older residents who clung to her words like gospel. Whispers that Lily was unstable, that she was trouble, that she had come from some mess up north and brought her drama with her. Someone anonymously posted flyers on community bulletin boards, featuring a blurred, unflattering photograph of Lily, along with vague, ominous warnings about strangers bringing disruption to our peaceful street. One morning, Lily awoke to find her mailbox vandalized, the door torn half off its hinges, a childish scrawl scratched into the side, "Go back where you came from." Each act, taken alone, was petty, almost laughable. Together, they formed a steady drumbeat of harassment designed to isolate Lily, to exhaust her into retreat. But if Karen thought Lily would break under the pressure, she was sorely mistaken. Lily fortified herself the same way she had fortified her property, methodically, strategically, and without fanfare. She installed a reinforced steel mailbox. She joined the local neighborhood watch group not to socialize, but to ensure she had a seat at the table when discussions of safety and security arose. She began documenting the flyers, the vandalism, the rumors, gathering a second mountain of evidence that, when combined with the legal action already underway, painted a damning portrait of targeted harassment. Meanwhile, Karen grew bolder, mistaking Lily's silence for weakness. Late one night, Lily returned home from a gallery showing downtown to find a strange, oily residue smeared across her front steps, slick and treacherous in the faint light of her porch lamp. A less cautious person might have slipped, fallen, maybe even broken something. But Lily saw it in time, carefully navigating around the mess, documenting it with her phone before washing it away. It was amateurish, crude, but the intent was clear. Karen wasn't just trying to intimidate her anymore, she was trying to hurt her. Rachel, ever pragmatic, urged Lily to stay patient, to let the growing list of offenses strengthen their countersuit. "The more she acts out," Rachel said with a tight smile, "the more she hands us the rope to hang her case with." But patience had its limits. The breaking point came during one particularly suffocating Saturday afternoon when Lily hosted a small gathering in her backyard. Just a few close friends from town, nothing elaborate, nothing disruptive. They laughed, grilled burgers, shared stories under the string lights Lily had painstakingly hung along the perimeter of the fence. It was the first real moment of peace Lily had felt since moving in. Until the shouting started. Karen, red-faced and sweating, stumbled out of her house and across the street, bellowing obscenities so loud they cut through the chatter like a blade. She accused Lily of throwing a drunken orgy, of corrupting the neighborhood, of turning Ashford Lane into a slum. She hurled insults at the guests, some of whom had never even met her before, her voice growing shriller with each passing second. Lily's friends froze, the easy camaraderie of the evening shattered by the sudden, violent intrusion. For a moment, Lily stood there, heart pounding, torn between rage and disbelief. She wanted to scream back, to tell Karen exactly what kind of pathetic, miserable creature she had become. But she didn't. Instead, she calmly pulled out her phone, dialed the non-emergency line once again, and reported a public disturbance. The police arrived within minutes, finding Karen still raging incoherently in the middle of the street. Witness statements were taken, formal complaints filed, and Karen was issued a citation for disturbing the peace. It wasn't a dramatic takedown, no handcuffs or shoving into squad cars, but it was a public humiliation, a stain that would cling to her reputation like oil on water. Later that night, after the guests had left, offering hugs and murmured promises of support, Lily sat alone on her porch, staring out into the darkness. She felt the exhaustion of battle settling deep into her bones, but beneath it was a quiet, fierce satisfaction. Karen had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. No amount of lies, lawsuits, or dirty tricks could undo what had happened that night. The mask of respectability Karen had so carefully cultivated over the years had cracked wide open, and everyone had seen what slithered beneath. And Lily, tired, bruised, but unbroken, knew that whatever came next, she was ready. Because sometimes survival wasn't about fighting louder or dirtier. Sometimes it was simply about outlasting your enemy. And Lily Harper had learned how to endure. In the weeks following the public collapse of Karen's dignity, Ashford Lane settled into a tense, brittle calm, the kind of uneasy quiet that precedes a new storm rather than signals the end of one. Lily Harper knew better than to believe the worst was behind her. She moved through her days with a cautious precision, a soldier navigating a minefield, because while Karen had been bloodied in battle, she was not yet defeated, and wounded pride was a dangerous catalyst for desperate actions. At first, it seemed as though Karen might finally retreat into the obscurity of her shame. She stopped attending neighborhood functions, her once proud garden grew wild with neglect, and the local newsletter, which she had unofficially curated for years, arrived half-heartedly printed and riddled with mistakes. There were even rumors whispered over coffee tables and back fences that Karen was preparing to sell her house, whispers that filled Lily with a guilty, cautious sense of hope. But hope, she reminded herself bitterly, was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was a Saturday morning when the next phase of Karen's campaign revealed itself, subtle and insidious. Lily received a notice taped to her front door, delivered by courier without so much as a knock. It was a violation notice, not from a court, not from the city, but from a self-appointed Neighborhood Standards Committee that Karen had hastily cobbled together from her last few loyal followers. The letter accused Lily of non-compliant structures, unsightly property maintenance, and disruptive landscaping practices, citing her newly repaired fence, the string lights in her backyard, and even the positioning of her garbage bins on Collection Day as offenses against the visual harmony of Ashford Lane. There were no official stamps, no city logos, no legal teeth to the document, but the language was formal enough to unsettle a less experienced homeowner. Lily's hands tightened around the paper, her mouth twisting into a grim smile. It was laughable in its desperation, but infuriating in its persistence. Karen wasn't trying to win by strength anymore. She was trying to grind Lily down through endless petty attrition, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Rachel Bennett, ever the pragmatist, advised Lily to ignore the faux citations while simultaneously documenting their delivery as part of the ongoing harassment record. The more groundless complaints they file, Rachel explained, the more credible your claim for punitive damages becomes when we countersue. But even with Rachel's cool reassurance, Lily couldn't shake the feeling of being under siege. Every time she set foot outside, she felt the weight of unseen eyes judging her every movement. When she watered her plants, when she swept her porch, when she took out the trash, she imagined Karen and her dwindling circle of cronies noting each action, looking for some imagined infraction to weaponize against her. Then, a week later, came the incident that changed everything. It was just after dusk, a thick, humid twilight settling over the neighborhood, when Lily's phone buzzed with a text alert from her security system. Motion detected. Backyard. Her stomach clenched, the familiar surge of adrenaline flaring through her chest. She moved quickly but silently to the window overlooking the rear of the property, heart hammering as she peered into the growing darkness. At first, she saw nothing, just the shifting shadows of magnolia trees in the dimming light. Then, from the corner of her eye, movement, a figure creeping along the side fence, crouched low, clutching something metallic and cylindrical. Lily's hands moved on autopilot, dialing the emergency number, whispering her address and the situation with a calmness she didn't feel. As the dispatcher kept her on the line, Lily watched the intruder work methodically, unscrewing the base of one of her solar-powered garden lights, pouring a dark liquid, gasoline her mind supplied grimly, into the soil near the base of the fence. It wasn't Karen. This figure was thinner, more agile, moving with practiced stealth. A hired hand, perhaps, someone Karen had convinced or paid to do what she no longer dared attempt herself. The police arrived with surprising speed, sirens muted, but lights flashing. They caught the intruder before he could slip away, pinning him against the fence and disarming him with swift efficiency. As they questioned him, Lily listened from her porch, piecing together the story from the officers' low, clipped exchanges. The man, a drifter with a record of petty vandalism and arson attempts, claimed he had been asked to send a message to Lily Harper in exchange for a few $100s. He wouldn't say who had hired him outright, but the implication hung thick in the humid air, undeniable and damning. The arrest changed the trajectory of everything. Now, the harassment wasn't just neighborly disputes and slander, it was criminal conspiracy. Rachel moved swiftly, filing an emergency motion to expedite their countersuit, citing the escalation from property damage to endangerment. She also advised Lily to consider filing a personal protection order against Karen, a move that Lily initially hesitated over but ultimately agreed to. It was no longer about neighborly feuds or even personal pride. It was about safety. News of the arrest spread quickly, faster even than Karen's earlier rumors. This time, however, the narrative didn't favor her. The neighbors who had once clung to neutrality or passive tolerance now turned away from her in droves, reluctant to be associated with someone whose vendetta had crossed the line into outright criminal behavior. Where once Karen had held sway with her sharp tongue and iron grip on Ashford Lane's social fabric, now she found herself isolated, her calls unanswered, her few remaining allies unwilling to meet her gaze in public. Lily watched the unraveling from a distance, neither gloating nor pitying. She had no energy left for spite. Every step she took, every move she made, was focused solely on reclaiming her life, on reinforcing the fragile, hard-won peace she had begun to glimpse through the cracks of the chaos. She upgraded her home security again, installing shatterproof film on her windows, reinforcing her door frames, coordinating with local patrol routes to ensure regular checks near her property. She attended the first hearing regarding the protection order with calm, steely resolve, presenting her evidence without embellishment, answering the judge's questions with quiet certainty. When the order was granted, restraining Karen from any contact or proximity within 500 feet of Lily's property, she allowed herself a small, private sigh of relief. It wasn't total victory. Not yet. But it was a turning point. And Lily Harper, for the first time in months, could finally see a future that wasn't shaped by fear. Lily Harper had always understood that victories in real life were seldom clean, that when you won a battle, especially against someone as venomous and prideful as Karen Miller, it didn't always come with neat endings and clear resolutions. Court orders and restraining notices might look good on paper, but they didn't erase malice or extinguish grudges. They simply pushed the hostility underground, where it fermented into something colder, more calculating. The days after the restraining order went into effect passed with an unnerving, brittle kind of calm. Karen's house remained dark and shuttered, her car conspicuously absent from the driveway, and the street, once thick with her poisonous energy, now lay quiet like a battlefield stripped clean after a storm. Yet Lily could not allow herself to relax, because she knew that Karen's spite was not the kind to wither away quietly. It was the kind that twisted itself into something even more dangerous once cornered. The first sign that the war was far from over came in the form of anonymous calls to city inspectors. Over the course of 1 week, Lily received 3 separate notices for random inspections. One alleging improper electrical work in her garage, another questioning the structural integrity of her new fencing, and a third citing an alleged code violation concerning the permitted height of her backyard shed. Each complaint triggered a mandatory inspection, forcing Lily to rearrange her schedule, to open her home and property to strangers probing for infractions she knew didn't exist. Each time, the inspectors found nothing of concern, issuing clean reports and departing with embarrassed apologies, but the disruption was calculated and effective. Karen could no longer approach Lily directly, but she could still manipulate the systems around her, weaponizing bureaucracy against her enemy with surgical precision. Lily countered by maintaining meticulous records, photographing every inspected area, collecting written statements from the inspectors themselves, and forwarding every piece of documentation to Rachel Bennett, who added them to the growing file that was slowly strangling Karen's legal defenses like a creeping vine. Yet, even as Lily fortified her position legally, the psychological toll gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Every ring of the doorbell made her heart jolt with suspicion. Every official-looking envelope in the mailbox spiked her blood pressure. She lived under a constant, low-level siege, and even though she outwardly projected strength and control, the strain seeped into her bones, eroding the quiet life she had fought so hard to build. Then came the attack on her reputation. An anonymous email campaign began circulating through local community boards and social media groups, accusing Lily of being a problem neighbor, of threatening an elderly woman, of engaging in illegal construction practices, and disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. The messages were carefully worded, not overtly defamatory enough to constitute clear libel, but dripping with insinuation, seeded with half-truths and manipulations of public record. Photos taken without her knowledge, grainy shots of her working in the garden, unloading supplies, even chatting with contractors, were attached as evidence of her supposed disruptive influence. Most of her neighbors ignored the smear campaign. Their loyalties hardened after witnessing Karen's previous meltdown, but a few more distant acquaintances began treating Lily with wary politeness, the kind reserved for those under an invisible cloud of suspicion. It would have been easy to lash out, to defend herself publicly, to confront those who whispered behind closed doors, but Lily understood that dignity was a weapon too. She stayed silent, methodical, working with Rachel to quietly document the attacks, compiling evidence of the false claims and unauthorized surveillance. They traced the email accounts through legal channels, slowly peeling back the layers of anonymized servers and shell addresses until the trail, unsurprisingly, led straight back to Karen's dwindling circle of loyalists, people who, when faced with subpoenas and potential charges, quickly turned on their benefactor with the eagerness of rats abandoning a sinking ship. Even as Lily battled these invisible assaults, a more tangible threat was brewing. One evening, returning home from a late appointment with Rachel, Lily found her front porch reeking of chemical accelerant. Panic flared in her chest as she approached cautiously, flashlight sweeping over the wooden floorboards. She discovered small, hastily extinguished scorch marks near the edge of the steps, as if someone had attempted to set the porch alight but aborted the attempt or been interrupted. Shaken, she reviewed her security footage and found a blurry figure darting through the shadows, too quick and indistinct for positive identification but clearly familiar with the property layout. She immediately called the police, filed yet another report, and coordinated with the fire department to assess the damage and enhance fireproofing measures around her home. The fire marshal, a grizzled veteran with a nose for foul play, shook his head grimly as he inspected the scene. "They're escalating," he warned, voice low and serious. "This isn't about property disputes anymore. Whoever's doing this is desperate. You need to stay alert." Lily nodded tightly, swallowing down the cocktail of fear and rage boiling in her chest. She reinforced her security measures once again, installing additional high-resolution cameras with infrared capabilities, setting up motion-triggered alarms linked directly to local authorities, and arranging for random security patrols to swing by. Her property during nighttime hours. Her home transformed into a fortress, not because she wanted to live like a prisoner in her own sanctuary, but because she refused to allow fear to drive her out. As the legal battles crept toward their inevitable conclusion, Rachel delivered an unexpected piece of news. Karen's financial situation was deteriorating rapidly. The mounting legal fees, the cost of fines and citations, The ongoing maintenance of a house she could no longer sell easily due to her tarnished reputation had pushed Karen to the brink of bankruptcy. It was only a matter of time before she was forced to liquidate her assets or face foreclosure. Lily listened to the report with a quiet, hollow sense of vindication. She had not set out to destroy Karen's life, she had only sought to protect her own. But actions have consequences. And Karen's downfall was a result not of Lily's vengeance, but of Karen's own relentless malice turning back upon her like a blade sharpened too thin. Still, Karen had one last desperate move to make. It happened during a neighborhood meeting, one Lily had attended reluctantly at Rachel's advice, to maintain her standing as a responsible member of the community. Midway through the gathering, as discussions meandered through landscaping grants and historical preservation efforts, the door to the hall burst open, and Karen stumbled in, disheveled, face flushed with a volatile cocktail of rage and alcohol. She screamed accusations at Lily, calling her a liar, a manipulator, a destroyer of lives. She waved a crumpled piece of paper above her head, an outdated survey map, irrelevant and long since superseded by modern records, claiming it proved that Lily's fence had been built on stolen land, that Lily had stolen part of her yard. The room fell into stunned silence as Karen ranted, her words slurring, her body trembling with furious energy. Lily didn't move, didn't speak. She simply sat, calm and composed, while the community witnessed Karen's final self-destruction. The meeting organizers quickly escorted her out, and police were called once again. This time, charges were pressed for public intoxication and disorderly conduct, and the judge overseeing the harassment case took immediate notice of the violation of the restraining order. It was the last gasp of a woman drowning in her own hatred, and for the first time in months, Lily allowed herself a true, unguarded smile as she watched the door close behind Karen's shrieking figure. It was over. The war that Karen had started was ending not with a dramatic courtroom verdict, not with a fiery confrontation, but with the slow, grinding collapse of a bully who had overplayed every hand and found herself abandoned, disgraced, and irrelevant. Lily Harper had survived, and Ashford Lane at long last could breathe again. The culmination of Lily Harper's battle against Karen Miller did not unfold with the explosive drama one might expect after months of tension, harassment, and escalation. Instead, it unraveled with the slow, methodical finality of a tower crumbling, stone by stone, inevitable and unstoppable. The official court date for Lily's countersuit and Karen's now frivolous lawsuit arrived on a gray Wednesday morning, the sky low and heavy with the promise of rain, a fitting backdrop for the reckoning about to take place. Lily sat quietly in the courtroom, flanked by Rachel Bennett on one side and a small contingent of neighbors on the other, who had volunteered to provide testimony about the months of hostility they had witnessed firsthand. Across the aisle, Karen looked nothing like the self-assured neighborhood queen she had once been. She was visibly thinner, her skin sallow and drawn, her hair pulled back into a tight, severe bun that did nothing to disguise the tremble in her hands, or the nervous darting of her eyes. The proceedings began with the judge, a stern woman with a reputation for intolerance toward frivolous litigation, methodically reviewing the submitted evidence. Rachel presented Lily's case with clinical precision. Security footage of Karen trespassing and vandalizing property, official police reports documenting the escalation of threats and violence, records of the false complaints filed against Lily, and testimony from the fire marshal regarding the attempted arson incident. Each piece of evidence built upon the last, layer after unassailable layer, until the narrative was undeniable. Karen had embarked on a campaign of harassment and intimidation that went far beyond petty neighborly disputes and into the realm of criminal malice. When it came time for Karen's defense, her lawyer, a visibly uncomfortable young man who seemed to realize the sinking ship he had boarded, mumbled through weak arguments about emotional distress and community standards, arguments that crumbled under the weight of the evidence arrayed against them. Karen herself was called to testify, but her performance on the stand only deepened her demise. She vacillated between self-pitying sobs and indignant rage, contradicting herself repeatedly, undermining her own claims with outbursts that the judge reprimanded more than once. At one point, when pressed about the photographs and anonymous emails, Karen snapped, her voice rising in a shrill, desperate wail that echoed through the courtroom. "She destroyed my life. She turned everyone against me. She thinks she's better than us." The judge's gavel cracked sharply, silencing her tirade, and when Karen's lawyer attempted to salvage what little dignity remained, it was too late. The damage had been done, not by Lily's hand, but by Karen's own unraveling. In her final statement, Lily spoke simply, her voice steady and clear. She did not recount every grievance, did not wallow in the details of her suffering. Instead, she described her intentions when she moved to Ashford Lane, to restore a historic home, to build a quiet life, to contribute to the community. She spoke of the right to live in peace without fear or harassment, and the basic dignity of respecting one's neighbors. Her words carried the quiet weight of truth, unembellished and undeniable. When the verdict came, it was swift and merciless. The judge dismissed Karen's lawsuit with prejudice, ruling that it had been filed in bad faith and with malicious intent. She awarded Lily compensatory damages for property destruction, emotional distress, and legal fees, and, most significantly, punitive damages intended to punish Karen for her sustained campaign of harassment. The total amount was staggering, a sum Karen could not possibly pay without liquidating her home and whatever remained of her savings. The court also upheld the restraining order indefinitely, extending its terms to prevent Karen from residing within a specified distance of Lily's property. Karen's face crumpled as the verdict was read, the full weight of her defeat crashing down upon her with a final, crushing inevitability. She sat frozen for a long moment after the judge adjourned the court, her lawyer murmuring futile reassurances that she did not seem to hear. Lily rose calmly, gathering her papers, feeling the knots of tension that had bound her for so long begin to loosen, replaced by a slow, profound exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool and sharp, the rain just beginning to fall in light, misting drops. Neighbors approached Lily quietly, offering hugs and handshakes, murmured congratulations and apologies for the months she had endured in isolation. She accepted their support with grace but without triumphalism. She had not fought this war for applause or vindication. She had fought simply to reclaim her right to live in peace. Karen's downfall continued in the weeks that followed. Her house, once a pristine showcase of suburban propriety, fell into foreclosure proceedings as she defaulted on her mortgage, unable to pay the mounting debts accrued through her own relentless spite. Notices appeared taped to her front door, and for-sale signs sprung up like weeds around the property. Eventually, movers arrived, boxing up the remnants of her life in silent, efficient trips, while Karen herself was seen only once, slipping into a battered sedan, head bowed low, leaving Ashford Lane behind without so much as a farewell. The neighborhood itself underwent a slow, almost imperceptible transformation in her absence. Gardens that had once been neglected burst into bloom again. Porch lights that had been dimmed in caution now shone brightly in the evenings. Lily found herself invited to gatherings she once would have been too wary to attend, slowly weaving herself into the fabric of a community that had, at last, purged itself of its most corrosive element. And through it all, Lily remained grounded, wary of allowing victory to curdle into arrogance or complacency. She continued to tend her home with quiet diligence, repairing what had been damaged, nurturing what had been neglected, building something stronger and more resilient than what had existed before. She kept meticulous records still, not out of fear but out of a hard-earned understanding that vigilance was the price of peace. One evening, standing on her newly refinished porch as the sun dipped low over the rooftops, casting the world in hues of gold and fire, Lily allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of all that had been lost and gained, of the bruises left not on her skin but on her spirit, and of the quiet, relentless strength that had carried her through. She thought of Karen, not with anger or triumph, but with a distant, almost clinical pity for a woman who had been destroyed not by her enemy's hand, but by her own hatred turned inward. And then she turned away from the past, stepping into the house that was hers, utterly and irrevocably hers, and closed the door behind her with a quiet, final click. She had survived, she had endured, and at long last, she was free. Life, after Karen Miller's departure from Ashford Lane, settled into a new rhythm that felt almost unnervingly quiet at first, as if the absence of her constant hostility had left a hollow space where tension had once lived rent-free in every moment of Lily Harper's daily existence. At first, Lily moved through her routines with cautious expectation, half waiting for some sudden disruption, a door slamming where it shouldn't, an anonymous letter in the mailbox, some last desperate echo of Karen's venom left behind to haunt her. But days passed, then weeks, and the silence held, not heavy and oppressive as it had been, but light, clean, a silence that spoke of true peace rather than the uneasy calm before the next assault. Lily found herself sleeping more soundly than she had in months, waking to the soft chirping of birds rather than the crackle of adrenaline snapping her out of shallow, restless dreams. Slowly, she began reclaiming the spaces of her home and her mind that had been colonized by vigilance and fear. She expanded her garden, planting wildflowers along the once scorched edge of her fence, the vibrant blooms standing as small, stubborn symbols of renewal. She refurbished the backyard deck she had built during the first summer after moving in, sanding and staining the worn boards until they gleamed warm gold in the afternoon sun. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now stopped by with fresh-baked bread, homegrown vegetables, offers to lend a hand with projects large and small. There was no grand apology for their previous silence, no awkward confessions of guilt, just simple gestures of kindness that Lily accepted with quiet gratitude, understanding that trust and community, like gardens, had to be nurtured slowly and patiently. In time, Lily found herself not just surviving, but thriving in ways she had scarcely dared to imagine during the long siege of Karen's hostility. She reopened her art studio, hosting small workshops for local artists and students, her backyard serving as an open-air gallery for her sculptures and paintings. She joined a historical preservation society, applying her hard-earned knowledge of property rights and renovation to help other newcomers navigate the often treacherous waters of neighborhood politics. Her name, once whispered with suspicion among the more gossip-prone residents, now carried weight and respect, not because she had fought the loudest or struck the hardest, but because she had endured with grace and without compromising her integrity. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after Karen's final collapse, Lily received an invitation to the Ashford Lane annual garden tour, a tradition she had once admired from afar but never been brave enough to join. The note was handwritten in careful script, inviting her to feature her backyard in the tour, a quiet acknowledgement from the neighborhood that she had not just survived, but become an integral part of the community's new chapter. Lily hesitated only briefly before accepting, not out of a need for recognition but because it felt like the closing of a circle, a quiet victory sealed not with courtroom verdicts but with new life blooming from old wounds. On the day of the tour, her backyard was a riot of color and scent, a tapestry of flowers woven between the sturdy cedar fence that had once been the battleground for Karen's resentment. Children laughed as they wove between the garden paths. Neighbors sipped lemonade and admired the sculptures tucked between flowering bushes and hanging vines. Lily moved among them with easy grace, answering questions about her work, sharing stories of the house's restoration, offering gardening tips to anyone who asked. Not once did she think of Karen. Not once did she feel the old prickle of eyes watching her from behind a curtain. That shadow had lifted, finally and completely. Later, as twilight draped the sky in soft lavender and the last guests trickled away with warm goodbyes and promises to return soon, Lily sat alone on her porch, a glass of sweet tea in hand, and allowed herself to finally, fully breathe. She thought back to the woman she had been when she first moved to Ashford Lane, brittle with loss, desperate for sanctuary, and realized with a slow, dawning wonder how much she had grown beyond mere survival. The battles she had fought had not broken her. They had honed her, carved her into something sharper, stronger, and infinitely more enduring. Karen had tried to scorch Lily's world to ash, to poison her sense of safety, to crush her spirit beneath a mountain of petty malice and manufactured chaos. But, in the end, it had been Karen's own hatred that had consumed her, leaving Lily standing amidst the ruins, not defeated, but victorious in the only way that mattered, not by destroying her enemy, but by refusing to let her enemy destroy her. As the stars bloomed into life overhead and the warm night wrapped itself around the quiet street, Lily smiled to herself, a smile free of bitterness or triumph, a smile that belonged to a woman who had earned her peace through fire and stone and patience. She rose, stretched, and turned toward the welcoming light spilling from her front door. There would be other challenges ahead, of course. Life promised as much. But whatever they were, Lily Harper knew now with unshakable certainty that she would meet them head-on, not as a woman shaped by fear, but as one forged by resilience, standing tall behind the walls she had built, not to keep the world out, but to protect the life she had fought so hard to claim as her own. And as the door clicked shut behind her, leaving the night to its quiet hum, the house stood solid and bright against the darkness, a testament not to the battles fought within its walls, but to the quiet, unwavering strength of the woman who called it home.